Anita Lund here from Trainers Direct. And today I want to talk to you about a new function in Excel called XLOOKUP. The XLOOKUP function is available to Office 365 users, so be aware that if you are using an earlier version of Excel, this function won't be available. And also, if you're planning on sharing your workbooks with users on earlier versions, then the XLOOKUP function won't be available to older versions of Excel. The XLOOKUP function will eventually replace the old tired VLOOKUP and also more complex functions such as index and match, and it's much simpler to use with many benefits. So let's take a look at the XLOOKUP function. In this example, what I'd like to do is find the full name based on the employee ID. Now, in this particular example, the employee ID happens to be the first column in this table, which means that I could potentially use the VLOOKUP function to achieve this. The VLOOKUP function will search down the first column of a table or an array, and it will allow us to pull out a matching value in a column to the right. Now, the XLOOKUP function will also allow me to do that, but it also works the other way. So unlike the VLOOKUP function, the XLOOKUP function allows you to return a value to the left as well. So if I wanted to find a PAYG ID in column G and then return a full name from column E, I would be able to achieve that using XLOOKUP, but not with a VLOOKUP. Now, the first thing that I'd recommend that you do when you're working with either VLOOKUP or XLOOKUP is to format the range as a table. Now, the reason for this, and I'm just going to hit Control-A to select all, and then head across to Format as Table, which you'll find on the Home tab. The reason for this is because if you're planning on adding any extra rows to the end of the table, it makes the table a dynamic range, which means that the table will automatically expand to include any additional rows. Okay, so let's find the full name based on this employee ID using an XLOOKUP. There are two ways that we can add this function into Excel. We can either type it in from scratch, or we can make life a little bit easier and use our insert function button, which is this little FX button at the start of the formula bar. So I'm going to head across to there, and then you can see that takes me into the function library. Now, the function library, in my example, it's showing my most recently used function, and the XLOOKUP is at the top. Now, if you want to look elsewhere for the XLOOKUP function, there are lots of different function categories. It lives in lookup and reference. The other thing that you can do, if you're not sure where to go, you can search for the function at the top. So once you've found the XLOOKUP, if you click on it and press OK, it will show several arguments that you need to complete. Now, if you keep your eye on what's happening in the formula bar at the top, as you complete these arguments, it's very useful to get an understanding of how this function works. Now, we won't be exploring all of the arguments, but certainly the first 5. And notice that the first 3 are in bold down the left-hand side. This means that they're mandatory and you must fill them in. So the first argument that we need to input is the lookup value. So this, in this case, is what I'm searching for. It's the employee ID, which is in J2. And then where do I want to search for that? So in the lookup array, it's the employee ID column. So I'm going to click the first employee ID in A2. And then if I hold down Control Shift and down arrow, it automatically selects to the end. And notice that it's picking up the table column ID name rather than the actual range. And that's because we use the Format as Table option to format the table. The next argument is the return array. So this is slightly different to a VLOOKUP. If you're a familiar VLOOKUP user, you will know that there is only one array option, and that's the table array. So with a VLOOKUP, you select the entire table. With the XLOOKUP, we have 2 separate arrays. Now, in this case, once we've searched down the employee ID column for the lookup value in J2, which is right here, we need to tell Excel where to find the matching value, and that's where the return array comes in. So what I'm going to do is select the full name range. So E2, Control Shift down, selects to the end. So find the matching value in column E. And then the fourth argument, this is an interesting one. So this is an extra argument that's been added to XLOOKUP. It didn't exist in VLOOKUP. If a user enters an employee ID that doesn't exist in the range, what do you want Excel to do? Well, I'd like it to display an error message that says something like employee ID not found. Now, if you wanted to do this with a VLOOKUP, you would also have to introduce another function called if error. So this is what I'm talking about. It kind of wraps everything together and it just makes it a lot easier. The other thing I'll mention about the XLOOKUP, which is different to the VLOOKUP, is the match mode default. Now, the default in XLOOKUP is to find an exact match. In a VLOOKUP, you have to enter either a 0 or the word false to instruct Excel to find an exact match. So one less thing to worry about. In this case, I'm going to leave the match mode empty, and that's the default for exact match. So if I press OK, you can see here the employee ID, which is this one right here. It's searched in the first column and it's returning a match from the full name column. Now, we also mentioned that VLOOKUP cannot search down a column and then return a match to the left. So let's see how XLOOKUP goes about doing this. And what we're going to do this time is search for a PAYG ID and then return a match from the full name. So again, I head back into my insert function, I choose the XLOOKUP, and this time the lookup value is the PAYG ID. The lookup array is where I want to find that ID, and the return array in this example is the full name column. So again, I highlight the range, and then I can add this additional argument to tell Excel what to do if it doesn't find the PAYG ID. So I'm going to say not found and then press OK. So let's test out that not found by entering a PAYG ID that doesn't exist in the column. There we go. To demonstrate that also if I delete a column, so if I delete the department column, for example, it doesn't break the formula. So lots of benefits for using the new XLOOKUP. That's it for this tutorial. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.